Good morning, everyone. I think we'll go ahead and get started.
Good morning.
I'm Michele Roland Schwartz. I'm running for Kaiser City Council, and I'm really pleased to be here today with Carson Cottingham, who's running for Marion County Commissioner. Before we get started, I just want to say thank you to David Dolly for being here and helping us with the technology and logistical support. And of course, all of you for joining us today to hear a little bit more about Ashley and I, and a little bit more about our campaign. One of the reasons I invited Ashley to this conversation today is that we both have a shared history and experience in public service and doing advocacy, particularly with survivors of domestic violence. So Ashley, thank you so much for accepting my invitation to be here today.
Absolutely. Thanks for the invitation.
Absolutely.
Honor to be here with you.
Thank you, likewise. And so I wanted to just kind of take a quick moment for Ashley to introduce yourself and tell the folks that have joined us today a little bit more about who you are.
Great. Thank you, Michele. I'm Ashley Carson Cottingham. I'm running for Marion County Commissioner. I am a fifth-generation Oregonian. I've lived in Salem for about 6.5 years now. I have a background in public service, as Michele mentioned. This started, when I was a really small child. I grew up in Central Oregon, and I would deliver Meals on Wheels with my grandparents. I just will never forget the looks on the faces of the people who opened the door, who needed that meal from us. And, it was an opportunity to relieve some social isolation. Later on, I babysat for parents who were involved in the child welfare system. So I would watch the kids while parents received some support and training. Later, I went to law school. I really wanted to be an advocate for older adults and to ensure that there was a federal elder abuse prevention law in place, because we didn't have one back then. So I went to law school with that in mind. While I was there, as Michele mentioned, I volunteered on a domestic violence hotline. And so I would receive pages, back in the days when we had pagers, from the victims, and I would call them back in the middle of the night to talk about what they were experiencing and work to put together safety plans so that they could get out of a violent or unsafe situation. After law school, I did move to Washington, D.C. to advocate for seniors and people with disabilities. I was there when the Affordable Care Act passed, and in that law was included the Elder Justice Act, which was really exciting. I worked for 2 different U.S. senators while I was there, and I ran the Older Women's League, which is a national grassroots advocacy organization focused on economic security for older women. That was an incredible experience. We also worked on access to health care, dental care, poverty as a predictor for a shorter lifespan, and that we need to address that as a country. I had the amazing opportunity then to move back home to my home state, Oregon, and to run our state's Aging and People with Disabilities division. And so that division helps provide people with the long-term care and long-term supports that are needed to stay independent, healthy, and safe in their communities. That program also ran our elder abuse investigations for the state, and also the licensure of all of our long-term care facilities, nursing homes, assisted living, memory care. And that has led me now to want to be in elected office. I see a lot of issues here in our county that I want to tackle head on. We need to work on our homelessness crisis. I see people struggling in the streets. We at the county are tasked with the mental health services and supports to help people that are struggling on the streets. And so I want to work to put together a multi-pronged approach to address that topic. Also, we're in the middle of a public health crisis, and I don't see leadership at the top wanting to really take the crisis seriously with COVID-19 and make sure that we can get back to life as normal. Also, the wildfires have greatly impacted our county. It has been just tremendous to see the outpouring from the community, but we have to come together and support the people that have lost everything up the canyon. I'm ready to provide new leadership. We have not had a Democrat on our county commission in over 40 years. We need somebody new, someone that has experience in government leadership and who will lead with compassion, believe in science, and want to help people. So I'm ready to be your next county commissioner. I'm so excited to be here with Michele and to have this conversation today. So with that, I'll turn it over so we can hear all about Michele and her amazing background.
Thank you, Ashley. So again, welcome for those of you who are just joining us. I'm Michele Roland Schwartz. I'm a resident of Kaiser and running for Kaiser City Council. I'm a nonprofit leader with over 20 years of experience in domestic and sexual violence advocacy work. I'm originally from Crestwell, Oregon, but my roots here in Kaiser actually go back 80 years when my great-grandparents moved here to raise their family from Kansas. My grandmother went to Kaiser Elementary and ended up in North Salem High School, but didn't finish high school. She actually immediately went to work for a cannery before she got married and raised her own children. My grandmother growing up, they were renters. They actually just rented right around the corner where the fire station is now, and seasonally lived and worked on the local hop farms. So that working class background is something that runs deep in my family. They taught me how to make something out of nothing, and that grit is what has gotten me through the adversity of housing and food insecurity growing up. It is also what I brought with me and taught me lessons in my work as an advocate in domestic and sexual violence advocacy work in 3 different states, including Oregon, Tennessee, and Arizona. And it is what I'm bringing back to me now that my family and I have moved back to Oregon, back to Kaiser, which is our family roots. Well, there are 2 lessons that I've learned as an advocate for survivors of sexual and domestic violence, and that is that when people share their experiences with you, you need to believe them, and that when you show up for people without strings attached, meaningful change can happen. I believe that we must approach our issues in the city with humanity and dignity for all, and that is something that I would bring to the Kaiser City Council. I'm currently the executive director of the Oregon Sexual Assault Task Force, and there I have been able to leverage the scant amount of state funding and quadruple that with federal, competitive state, and other foundation dollars to help us build our work out in the state. I also am responsible for convening people from all over the state with varying perspectives, differing opinions, and experiences, and holding that tension that exists so that we can all make a path moving forward and make good decisions for our state. And that is something that I will bring to the Kaiser City Council. So thank you. I appreciate you all being here today. And want to open it up for questions. One of the things that I do want to talk a little bit about with Ashley first, however, is that I know in our shared experience doing domestic violence advocacy work, we know that domestic violence is a predictor for homelessness, and I know that this is something that you feel you feel a lot about and have a lot of compassion for. So can you talk a little bit about your experiences and what your vision is for Marion County?
Absolutely, thank you. So I think Michele's absolutely right. DV is a predictor for homelessness. We know that I think on average it takes a victim 7 attempts, if I have that right, to leave a violent or unsafe, abusive situation. And sometimes when a person is getting ready to leave that situation, they have no resources. So they have to leave sometimes in the middle of the night with nothing but the clothes on their back. Sometimes they have to leave children behind, which is just heart-wrenching, and try to figure out how to get those children back over time after getting out of the dangerous situation. What we see in Marion County is just a lack of dedicated resources. I think what we need is a multi-pronged approach. We need more permanent supportive housing. We need more shelters that are dedicated to women, and we need low barrier shelters, because also along with struggling through leaving a violent or unsafe situation, sometimes what accompanies that is addiction. And we need to have shelters that accept people exactly how they are, as Michele mentioned, so that we can help them through the process. We need to work with all the communities across the county to come up with the plan. We need to share resources. I don't think any one city in our county or necessarily our county can shoulder that whole financial burden. So we have to work with the state too, to make sure that we are providing the supports needed for addiction recovery services, a resource center that helps get people all set up with everything they need, additional investment in permanent supportive housing. We need to leverage federal dollars, something that it feels that sometimes our county commission is unwilling to do on the basis of ideology, and move forward with getting those supports in place to protect as many people as possible.
That's great. Thank you so much. I know one of the things that I'm keenly aware of is when we look at our homeless and unsheltered population, I believe the CDC has reported about 20% of our homeless and unsheltered are youth, and of those, about 40% or a little more are LGBTQ youth, and that we know that for those youth, perhaps being in unsafe family situations or being disowned by family is a risk factor for their experiences of homelessness. And I tie that to the changes and the conversations that the Kaiser City Council has been having over the last year or so with amending the charter and removing Section 44 of Kaiser's charter to remove that anti-LGBTQ language. And I believe, if you haven't already, you should be getting your Marion County voter pamphlet in the mail. I know, yes. And I had to write it down on my hand because I haven't memorized the number yet, but Measure 24453, the Kaiser New Home Charter, we really encourage folks to vote yes for that, so that we can usher in a new chapter for Kaiser. I also think that certainly ties into some of the conversations that we've been having for a number of years, but here more recently, the inclusivity resolution in Kaiser, and really marking a path forward that acknowledges the language that was in the charter has been a risk factor for our LGBTQ community here in Kaiser, and that we have the opportunity to address that while also acknowledging the racism, classism, xenophobia, transphobia, etc. in our community, and that inclusivity resolution is a really important path forward. And I'm supportive of the resolution, and I hope folks continue to show up for those conversations moving forward. So Ashley, thank you again for being here today. We wanted to highlight a couple of things that were important to us, but now want to turn it over to those of you who have joined us this morning. And if there are any questions, we will, I think, repeat the question back so that folks can all hear.
And thank you for joining this morning on this foggy, chilly morning.
Carol.
I'd like to ask the first question before I lose it in here, because Ashley, as she was talking, and you also, Michele, made me, and how much help the homeless people need, and the sexual abuse women and men need, and do you know how involved the faith communities are in helping these people? Do they need to become more involved? And can we use them as a resource until, through your work, that we get more federal dollars to help with this problem?
I can try to repeat the question. So I think the question is around what we've been discussing with homelessness, and then the sexual violence that can come along with becoming homeless to both men and women. And has the faith community been involved in providing supports and services, and can they do more while we're putting together a more comprehensive plan through multi-layered governmental approach? And I think I'll just speak a little bit to it. I think the faith community has been very involved. Multiple different entities, churches, etc. And perhaps they could be more involved. I think that there's been a number that are very generous and supportive and doing amazing things. I think one of the things that stands out to me, like with the gospel mission, is that it's really a male-only shelter. And so when we think about that, I just think about women that need something in a crisis and are turned away from there. And so I want to make sure we're providing, an equal number of resources to women and non-binary individuals as well. I also think, my philosophy is that government has a role to play, and that, we invest our tax dollars, and we should speak out as a community about what we want those invested in. And I think, the faith community can do so many wonderful things, but also we need our government to also partner and to really do the hard planning and lead through data and leverage those federal and state dollars to the maximum extent possible to help people.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that, Ashley. And I think also, just from my experience working for not a statewide nonprofit, seeing those conversations across the state and where faith leaders are stepping up and engaged in their community and supporting the local nonprofits. So here in Marion County, that's the Center for Hope and Safety, the center on Center Street, as we like to say. And that it does require that coordinated effort from both our nonprofit sector, our faith leaders, and our governmental partners as well, to make sure that we have supports put in place to help folks heal, to get access to the resources that they need, whether that's a roof over their head, food on the table, safety, education. All of those pieces are all really critically important to be responsive to survivors. Thank you. That's a great question.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Okay.
Hi.
What would you like to see county government do in regards to COVID-19 and the fact that Marion County seems to be more severely impacted than other places?
So the question is, what would you like to see Marion County do with their response to COVID-19, given that we have a very large number of cases compared to other counties? So much to say on this topic. This is just such not a laughing matter. First of all, it's completely unacceptable, the numbers of cases that we have.
Can you hold your mic more directional? There you go.
Yes,
Pick it
sorry.
up better. There you go.
So it's just not acceptable that we have this many cases in our county. First, I want to say that I think that the staff working in our public health division are doing everything that they can, given the constraints that they're working within. My biggest criticism is that the current Board of Commissioners really doesn't seem to take the pandemic very seriously. When I was watching the meeting this week, when the director of our public health division went up to give the numbers, one of the commissioners said, "Oh, we're still talking about that?" That was the retort when she went up to give the report out. Now, my heart breaks because I work in long-term care, and we have had, I believe as of yesterday, 97 or 98 fatalities in our county. And most of those people are older adults, and I don't think it's okay that they're dying of COVID because they're older. I think we have to prevent COVID from getting into our long-term care facilities. That starts with following the public health guidance that has been very readily available for months and months and months now. That includes wearing masks when you're interacting with anyone outside of your immediate family. It requires social distancing. It requires not having events inside. And it requires not attending large events. And if you are going to be where there's, more than 20 or so people, you have to make sure you're wearing that mask at all times and maintaining as much social distance as possible. What I don't see is that type of behavior modeled at the top of our county leadership. And I think that matters. Just as it matters in our nation, where we have not seen some of our leaders at the very top modeling that behavior. And it's so tragic. I don't want to see a single person have this virus and not recover from it. So I think, when you run the public health division, you have to believe in science and you have to follow public health guidance. That's how you save lives. That's how you get businesses back open and operating at their full capacity. And that's how you get kids back to school. Our communities are under so much stress, trying to educate their children, trying to work from home if they're lucky enough to still have a job. So, we have to pull it together here in Marion County. I think if everyone was following that guidance to a T, we would have much lower incidence of this virus in our community, and we could get back to that state of having kids back in schools, businesses reopen. So I could go on and on about this topic. It's tragic. Every day, like I said, I see the fatalities. I see the building that it's associated with. I know what's going on there. And it's caregivers accidentally bringing the virus in, and the caregivers aren't equipped with the right PPE or haven't been given the information about how critical it is to utilize it at all times. So I'll stop there. End of rant.
It's hard to follow that up. I appreciate everything that you just said. I will add, however, that I think also from my framework, doing sexual and domestic violence work, we all play a role in ending violence. We also all play a role in preventing this virus from spreading, and we all have to show up and do our part. I think one of the other things that I want to acknowledge is we have to do a better job of addressing the emotional toll that isolation has had on our community members, the mental health impacts, not only for our folks who are in long-term care facilities and have not had the opportunity to be with their family, but also the need for us to all be in community with one another. I think that's something that is really important to address, and the only way we're going to get there is if we take this seriously and if we all play a role in preventing the spread of the virus. So thank you. Roland.
Yes, could you, this is for you, Michele.
Yeah.
Could you talk about your support for local businesses here in Kaiser? I've heard conversation that folks support, which candidates support local businesses, and in my opinion, they all do. But talk about your support for local businesses.
Thank you. So the question is about my support for local businesses, and that many of our candidates who are running support businesses, but specifically kind of my perspective on the issue. So I think I'm going to go back to our experience with the pandemic and being stuck at home and seeing the devastation and the negative impact that has had, particularly on our small businesses. Folks really struggling because they could not open their doors. And so I know for us as a family, when businesses were able to perhaps have takeout or drive-by pickup, whatever that was, my husband and I made very intentional decisions about where we put our resources, whether that was Los Dos or Mommy and Maddie's. I know, I had this wild hair that I was going to learn how to play the guitar, and I had some birthday money saved, and so I went to Uptown Music and bought myself a guitar. I will learn how to play it someday, I promise you. But identifying what those businesses, supporting those businesses and really putting our resources and our support and rallying around. And I think I'll use also the recent example of the wildfires. It broke my heart to see like our coffee kiosks not being able to open because it was not safe for their staff to have the windows open and closed on a regular basis. The long-term impact of our environment and the pandemic in general has made it very difficult for our businesses, and that's something that I think that we, again, all have the opportunity to show up for and make some changes so that we can keep our doors open, get people back in community with one another. And so that is my perspective on small businesses.
Thank you.
Thanks, Roland.
I'm happy to add on to just, I want to share that a lot of my experience in running a very large part of our state government, the Aging and Disability Division, involved working directly with businesses that are in all the communities of our state, and those are our long-term care providers. And so my budget at the Office of Aging and People with Disabilities was $3.4 billion, a biennial budget. And, that's a huge number and a huge responsibility of federal dollars flowing to the state. The state also puts forth a certain amount of money. And that money goes right back out the door to businesses all across the state and right here in Kaiser to provide long-term care to the people that need it, all of the supports that they need around, eating and drinking and bathing and, getting up to walk around and get in and out of bed. And so what I did is worked very closely with our providers and their associations to ensure that the rates were adequate over time. And every 2 years we would renegotiate those rates. And so that was money flowing directly into your community, to the various facilities that you see, but also the ones that are tucked away in everyone's neighborhoods, which are the adult foster homes, where it's just 5 or fewer residents living there. So I fought tirelessly to ensure that those rates were adequate to provide, an appropriate amount of care, high quality care to residents. I also worked to create thousands of jobs through in-home caregivers. So with that budget, the Medicaid dollars could be used to hire people to work in-home instead of going into a facility. And those are family wage jobs with benefits, paid time off, healthcare, union jobs. And our state is very proud to report that more than half of the population that would need nursing home level of care can actually receive that care in their own home through someone that they trust who becomes a caregiver, and it creates a job right here in your community. So I have that experience of using federal dollars, state dollars to really figure out what's going to work best for our businesses, but also how it's going to best support the people in the community that need that service.
Thanks, Ashley. And Roland had to step out, so.
Yeah, I have a question about communication. At the city, I think in the county level, the Statesman, the local newspaper, well, lesser so the Kaiser Times, doesn't cover the county commission at all anymore. So it seems like there's a real, what the heck is the commission doing? I mean, honestly, I couldn't even tell you what they've been involved in until we got a flyer about, 4 months ago saying what a great job they've done, which surprised me. And then also Kaiser, I know they had a hard time when they passed the park and the police fees. After that passed, people would come to council saying, when the heck, when did this come up? Well, a lot of it's on us to get involved, watch the meetings, I understand that, but just in general, what would you like to see in terms of communication? How would you reach out? What can we do to better have more back and forth? That's a long question.
I think, the mailer I think is actually a good idea. I don't know how much it costs every time it goes out, but it is a way to get the core services of the county out into people's minds. Like, oh, this is what my property taxes are paying for. I think with the pandemic and the wildfires, it's come even clearer into view the importance of county government and having strong leadership there, because people are now acutely aware of the fact that our public health division is a lead on preventing pandemics, and a lead on dealing with crises like, all things emergency management. I would like to see a lot more social media. I would like to see town hall style meetings, like leading up to budget build, that you don't just kind of come to the county commission meeting and approve the budget through a consent agenda style process. I think you need to go out to all the communities of your county, have meetings when it's safe to do so in person, but maybe until then we do that via Zoom or at least through conference calls, because not all places in our county have broadband internet, which is another thing I want to address. But engage, what's important to you out in Jefferson? What do you want your county dollars going to? Kaiser, what do you want your county dollars going to? And kind of come up with your prioritization through an engagement process. And then communicate out more frequently. I will give props that I think that the communication has improved over the past couple of months, given everything that's going on in the county. But we do have a gap in our media. The Kaiser Times did cover the commission race recently and talk about my philosophy and my opponent's philosophy. So that was really nice to have that opportunity. And I think the Statesman Journal will be covering as well in the next couple of weeks. So I think just continue to put pressure too on the various media outlets that we do have, showing that we do want to know what's going on at all levels of government in our communities would be another way to apply pressure.
Thank you. I think I'll just add to that if that's okay. I think elect Ashley and me in our positions, and we will definitely be working very well together to
Yes.
get information out. And I think, one of the things I'm kind of calling on my experience working for the nonprofit that I'm in, and when pandemic hit and wildfires hit, we had programs all across the state that were struggling to maintain services, to communicate with each other, and it was all disciplines. And so we have hosted over the last, since March, weekly statewide phone calls where we basically kind of talk about, okay, this is what we know is happening, and also you in Burns, you in Ashland, you on the coast, talk about what's happening in your community so that we can all learn from each other and figure out how we can, better serve our communities. And so I think having a similar model where we have those opportunities for the county and the city to be able to coordinate better with one another and get that information out, I think is going to be really useful. I also think it's important in terms of communications that we are expanding our communications beyond just the English language, that we make that accessible for all members of our community in Spanish and other languages, I think is really important. And using social media, our print media, etc., to get that information out to all members of our community. Because otherwise, it's great if we make that system better, but not so great if we just keep it siloed and really focused on English in particular. So,
Yeah, I would definitely second that. I think through the pandemic, we've seen such a disparate impact on our communities of color, and a lack of support early on for our farm workers, a lack of information going out immediately in Spanish and other top languages, and the same was impacting long-term care, where we're seeing all those fatalities, where the information was not getting out to the workers in multiple languages, and it's ridiculous that that would be the case in today's world, knowing that most of the people working in long-term care are low-income women of color. And so I think continuously applying that pressure to make sure that all the information is accessible is critical to better supporting our communities.
And I would just add on one thing is if we have interpretation, if we have translation services to reach a broader community, that labor needs to be paid for. I don't think that we need to continually rely on our nonprofits and other folks in our community to do that work for free. Have our nonprofits do it, sure, but pay them to do it, because that is time, that is labor, and I think it is really critical and important. It's something that I believe very strongly in, and would love to see happen more in our community.
Absolutely.
David.
I have a dovetail question to your questions about outreach from the commission to the citizens. My question turns it back the other way. Our Oregon Constitution directly gives counties really crucial services to deliver, but because sometimes we don't understand our county because we're kind of out here and they're centrally usually located, that dollars at the state are highly difficult sometimes to leverage for these services, that only the counties have been, for our Oregon structure of government, other states, a county's like a boundary for a post office. Here in Oregon, these counties deliver these services, and we don't always understand as citizens that we need to leverage the state to execute and fund the counties to deliver mental health services. We think, oh, we got to ask the state. No, we need to negotiate when these funds are being tight. And what relationships do you have, or how do you see rallying Marion County community to make sure you can lead and get the funds that the county should get? But in the past, if you look at the math, they haven't got the dollars for the really crucial services that they're supposed to deliver.
That's an excellent question. So the question is about the way our state's structured and that the counties are tasked with giving critical services. But you also have to work with the state to leverage additional dollars or more dollars to flow to the county. Traditionally, Marion County has not gotten all that we need to do what we are tasked with doing. And so, I mean, my answer to that question is that I think it starts with relationships. What I can bring to the table is that I have very strong relationships at the Capitol. Through my work in running large government programs, I have worked with the Speaker of the House. I have worked with the chair of the Health and Human Services Committees, the Senate Human Services Committee. Like all of the people that care about this stuff at our Capitol, I've worked with and can communicate the needs of our county to the leadership of our legislature and to our governor, to ensure that we get what we need. The relationship of our current county commission with leadership at the Capitol and the governor is not great. It has been very adversarial, including putting forth, opening, requests to open way too early in the pandemic, given what the data was showing, the numbers and the fatalities. Kind of trying to ignore the metrics put out by the public health experts, apply political pressure without looking at the science and what was actually occurring. And so I think I will bring a different approach, and I have no problem working on both sides of the aisle at the Capitol. That's the experience I have. I couldn't have gotten my budget approved for $3.4 billion if I didn't have support on both sides of the aisle. And so I think Marion County being situated where the Capitol is, I think capital cities and the surrounding areas do oftentimes get overlooked in some of those larger legislative packages or priorities. And it just takes someone willing to really do the hard work of going to communicate the needs and making sure that, one thing, this is a little bit of a tangent, but I think part of our homelessness crisis is connected to the fact that we have the state hospital situated here in our county, in Salem. And we have done the right thing by wanting to move far, far away from institutionalizing individuals, but we haven't then had the commensurate investment in the supports that are needed to keep people healthy, safe, and independent. So when you close the doors to the state hospital, but you're not opening up those community-based options with intensive case management, it leaves people without the services they need. And so I feel like I can bring that perspective and conversation and voice to the table to really come up with some solutions.
Carol.
We're going to go away from that. I have two questions, one to Michele and one to Ashley, and they both relate to EMS services. And to Ashley, in light of what has happened up in the Santiam Canyon, what do you see as formulating some sort of EMS plan if that should ever happen in another area of Marion County? Is there a plan available? And if not, how do you see that plan coming forth?
So the question is about emergency management, emergency preparedness in light of what has happened up the Santiam Canyon and what we need to do moving forward because, you know, inevitably there will be another wildfire or there will be a different type of emergency situation that we need to handle collectively. So I think what we've seen is that people weren't given the proper notice. They were given varying, levels of information. We know that, the internet and cell service up there is not great in all places. And I think the current plan was to rely on some of that, rely on internet alerts going out, rely on cell alerts going out. But when the power goes out, your internet goes out. So, I think it's safe to say that that plan is not good enough. And we need to rethink our emergency, continuity of operations plan for the county. I did learn that I think our Public Works Division Director is also our emergency manager. So I'm not sure that that's fair to him, to task him with a huge division, plus when some crisis occurs, now you need to pivot to be a completely, related but very different role. And so I think in my experience in state government, the level of detail that you need to get to in an emergency preparedness plan is painstaking. And my experience is that people don't want to get to that level of detail, that it's very complicated, it's very tedious, but I'm committed because I believe that every life matters in our community. Like everybody up the canyon deserve to get a phone call, a knock on the door, some notice with enough time to get out. And my experience in this is around long-term care where, trying to figure out how is every person that I talked about that lives in their own home with a caregiver versus being in a nursing home, how are they going to get out in a fire? And the response that I got was always, well, that's the county's responsibility. Well, given what I've seen, I'm not confident that any county in our state is ready to help get those homebound individuals out in time. And so we have to do that planning. We have to come together. We have to know where people are without invading privacy, of course, and make sure that we're keeping people safe. And, we're really putting our first responders at risk when we aren't getting them the communication early and often, because then they're trying to go in and save lives too. So, I think it's going to take a whole overhaul of the way the plan is comprised right now, with some broad community conversations about how we're going to do better next time.
Thank you. Michele, would you address that to the Kaiser
I
level?
would love to, and I think I'm going to start from my own experience doing crisis response planning in Oregon for survivors who maybe need access to medical care after experiencing sexual assault. And that it looks different in every single community. And so, you know, we come up with statewide protocols that are kind of a blanket approach, but they need to be adapted for each community because each community has its own infrastructure, resources, and people power. And so I think I would bring, of course, that experience and skill set to the table to think about how we do that and how we do that in Kaiser. And I appreciate you saying the painstaking details because it gets really complicated when you think about, I mean, first off, if I were one of the folks that had to have run out of the canyon, I wouldn't have made it with this on, right? So let's thinking about a plan for folks who are seniors or elders or people with disabilities. You know, I also saw like the impact of the wildfires and evacuation on our foster families. And so that's the level, the painstaking detail that I would want us to look at is not just do we have an emergency kit and do we have a route plan, but how do we get all of the folks out that are lack mobility or lack a safe place to go? And that's the lens that I would want to bring to this conversation. But I also, again, thinking of my experience in Oregon with sexual assault and domestic violence advocacy work, we spend a lot of time looking at responses and not enough time looking at prevention. And what are the things, like I know that the wildfire, this is something that we are going to need to be thinking about on a yearly basis. I also don't think that we need to be stuck there and that there are measures that we can take to turn us in a different direction and prevent wildfires from happening again in the future. Of course, we can't really prevent an earthquake, but what are the plans that we have put in place to make sure that all of our residents are able to evacuate safely, have a place to go, that we have you know, an organized effort? And I think a lot of that also includes public education. How do we get information out to people? I don't know that I have the resources right now to go out and buy an evacuation kit, all of the stuff that we need. So how do we also address that for folks that don't have the means to put together an emergency kit to get themselves out, to get their pets out? I will admit to sitting in our home while we were basically living on Mars is what it felt like, thinking, I have one pet carrier and 3 pets. If we need to leave, what am I gonna do? And so it's just thinking about all of those components to make sure that, you know, everyone has a plan. And again, I think also just going back to those notification systems and making sure that it is available in languages, in people's, you know, first language. And that we pay for that interpretation and that we pay for those translations. I think it's critically important.
Thank you.
Next question.
Yeah, no.
After the wildfires, okay, I'm in North Marion County.
Okay.
And I'm on the farm, and so for most of the years of my life, land use has been like a premier issue in order to try to save our family farm. But I do find that so far, Kaiser to me has been pretty good about land use and understanding that boundary between, you know, the UGB and the boundary between economic life and farm life. Marion County, not so much. But I just wonder, I would like to know what you think about the current land use laws. The current commission seems to pose everything as either or, and that it's either economic development or saving farmland, and that there's not any kind of way that you can mix uses and serve everyone. And so I was wondering what you guys thought about your relationships with rural, especially EFU.
So the question is about land use and the current county commission's approach to land use kind of being an either or approach, like either we're doing economic development or we're protecting farmland, I think. And so, you know, I come from a long line of farmers and foresters and, you know, my mom grew up on a small family farm. My grandma was a dairy farmer, and then, you know, generations prior in Oregon. So I feel very protective of our farmlands. I want to support our family farmers. I am in huge favor of looking at density within cities and communities versus usurping our productive agricultural or farmland. I am still learning about some of the decisions that the county has made over time. So I'm trying to get more educated on their philosophy. But what I've kind of seen in my, you know, in the last several months is that it doesn't really seem to be a consistent philosophy. It feels like there's a lot of talk about protecting our agricultural resources and our our family farms, our farmland, etc. But then very quick to then approve, you know, the Aurora Airport expansion and converting, you know, to converting the old church camp into you know, development without the proper infrastructure in place with water and sewer and so I think it's safe to say that my approach is going to be one of having the conversations with all of the people that care about the issue, that have different perspectives, and trying to figure out what the best plan and approach is moving forward. That said, you know, my philosophy will be to look at density within cities versus giving up productive land, and you know, protecting family farms. I think that's critical, and it's such a valuable resource. I think we need to be promoting and propping up our family farms and figuring out, I think, to what you were saying, like how do we make those combined with economic development? I mean, how do we promote the work of our family farmers to, you know, market it? We have some of the most amazing land in the country. So why aren't we doing like mass marketing of, not so people move in, but of our products and our, you know, what we can provide out to the world that grows right here, and, you know, give incentives for growing those products, you know, more and more. So I'd really like to look at a completely different approach that protects the land. And, you know, I care very, very deeply about protecting our air and water too, because we're not going to have productive farmland without clean water and enough water and clean air. So I'm committed to making some of those hard decisions as well on the environmental front.
I think one of the things that Ashley and I were actually talking about this morning before everyone arrived is the idea of these kind of hard lines. You have to be either on this side or this side. And we were talking about that nuance exists and that we want to bring nuance to those conversations, that it's not helpful to dig our heels in one side or the other. I also really want to look at greater housing density, particularly here in Kaiser. I know one of the state laws that passed in 2019 is going to compel us to do some of that, to be able to build some of that mid-level housing where we typically have single-family homes. And I also know that one of the issues that the Kaiser City Council is going to be talking about is our urban growth boundary. I know that I also have a lot to learn, and I freely admit that, but what I know I will bring to the conversation is nuance and not digging my heels in on one side or the other, because I also want to protect our beautiful, pristine farmland that surrounds us. And so that is something that I will bring to the conversation.
And I mean, I think whenever we're talking about our agricultural resources and our farms, it's important to talk about protecting our farm workers. And they are, you know, providing us our food every day, often go unthought of or unnoticed. But in looking how we've come through this pandemic and through the wildfires, seeing farm workers working out there when we were living on Mars without appropriate masks to protect stem from that really toxic smoke is unacceptable. And I am 100% committed to ensuring that our farm workers have the proper protective equipment that they need. And, you know, I've been learning about pesticides, and I think it's really, really unacceptable that we expose the people who are working hard to bring us our food to horrible pesticides that cause lifelong horrific impacts to children and adults. And so I think we can do better than that. I think we can move away from those types of toxic pesticides and still have amazing food and be doing the right thing on behalf of our farm workers.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for saying that. I think one of the other things that I just want to add is acknowledging and seeing our farm workers as more than just their labor, that they're our neighbors, they're our community members, and I want us to bring that dignity and humanity into our communities and into this space. I also was quite troubled knowing that our folks, our neighbors and our community members were out in the fields picking food for us while we were living on Mars. It's unacceptable. And so I want to shift the conversation from where we currently are in that regard. So
They were even picking hops in the
hops.
snow.
And grapes.
And some bus drivers were watching their school buses and working outside.
You said that the people were.
Bus drivers, a lot of them just kept working, were out there watching their buses and working outside.
Yeah.
The comment was that even, you know, people driving school buses are out there working in the toxic air without the appropriate, you know, personal protective equipment. So we need to protect all of our workers from unsafe and dangerous situations. Absolutely.
So I'm just going to ask someone for a quick time check because I think we said we would keep you here until 11.
11:11.
Hey,
Wow.
nice.
That's a good number.
That is a good number. So I want to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to ask a question. And I think Ashley, I don't know if you're able to hang around for a little bit. I will be able to hang around for a little bit after this. And so if you want to stay and visit, we can wear our masks and be physically distant and model the norms and behaviors we want to see in our community so that we can end this pandemic. But want to just say thank you so much for coming out today to chat with us, for showing up for your community. Actually, it's such a pleasure to get to hang out with you this morning. But otherwise, thank you so much, and we'll be hanging around here for just a little bit.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for your service.